Alice reached the house just before dark. The rain had thinned to a steady mist by then, enough to leave everything damp without obscuring the road. The drive-in from town had been quiet, the kind that came from most people already being home. Streetlights reflected softly off wet pavement near the water before falling away altogether. She turned onto a narrow gravel drive that led to a small gate at the front of the property. Beyond it, a short stone path ran toward the house, bordered by low hedges that had been trimmed back but not shaped. An arched lattice stood at the entrance, its white paint worn, vines clinging in places where they'd never been fully removed. The house sat farther back from the road than the others nearby. 2 stories, narrow and upright, with a pitched roof and deep-set windows. A stone chimney rose along one side, darkened from years of use. It looked older than the surrounding homes, not in need of repair. It had just been lived in carefully. Alice parked, shut off the engine, and sat for a moment with her hands resting on the wheel. She had taken a job in the next town over, close enough to commute, but far enough to feel like a reset. Her apartment wouldn't be available for another few weeks, and this place had filled the gap without complication. A former co-worker had put her in touch with the owner, a woman named Betty who had spent winters farther south. The arrangement had been brief and practical, exactly what Alice had wanted. She unlocked the gate and walked the path, her shoes damp against the stone. The porch light came on as she reached the steps. Inside, the house was warm and dry, carrying the faint scent of wood and something clean she couldn't place. She set her bag down just inside the door and moved through the rooms at once, unhurried. The living room held a fireplace with a simple wooden mantel, bare except for a clock that had stopped sometime earlier. The furniture didn't match, but it made sense. Chairs close to the hearth, a couch that showed use rather than display. The kitchen was narrow and functional. Cabinets worn smooth at the handles. A small table by the window facing the water. Upstairs, the room sloped gently with the roof line. 1 bedroom. Another opening into a finished upper space with low shelves and an armchair angled toward a single window. Rain tapped lightly against the glass. Alice Jones. The name crossed her mind as she moved back downstairs. Plain on paper. It always had been. People tended to assume things from it. She'd learned not to correct them unless it mattered. She left the lights off where she didn't need them and returned to the front room, listening as the house settled into itself. It wasn't her home, but it felt stable. The type of place that held others' lives without holding on to them. She took off her coat, hung it by the door, and went to put the kettle on. Outside, the path remained empty. Alice finished unpacking only what she needed. Clothes for the week, a few books she'd already read once and didn't mind leaving out. Everything else stayed zipped and stacked near the stairs, easy to move again when the time came. The house held warmth differently than she was used to. Not stale, but not heavy. The faint scent she'd noticed earlier lingered. Wood and cinnamon. So subtle that it felt less like an attempt at comfort and more like a byproduct of the place itself. She opened the window briefly, then closed it again when the damp air pushed back in. She made a quick sandwich and ate standing at the counter, listening as the rain picked back up again, settling into a steady pattern against the roof. She decided tomorrow she'd drive into town early, learn the route properly, get a sense of where she'd landed. The new position was temporary, bookkeeping for a small firm on Main Street. Long hours at a desk, quiet work, nothing complicated. She rinsed her plate and set it in the rack. The phone rang as she was drying her hands. The sound came from the hallway, sharp and unfamiliar, the ring older than she was used to hearing. Alice paused, then followed it to the small table beneath the stairs. The phone there was corded, beige, its surface smooth from years of use. She picked up on the second ring. Hello? Alice, it's Betty. The line wavered slightly before steadying. I just wanted to make sure you got in all right, Betty said. Everything okay? Yes, Alice replied. Everything's fine. It's a lovely place. Good, good. Papers shifted faintly in the background. I meant to go over a few things with you the other day, but I got rushed. Real quick. The heat's on a timer, but it shouldn't give you trouble. Trash goes out Wednesday mornings. There was a small crackle in the line. And I think I may have forgotten to mention, Betty continued, her voice thinning briefly. A friend of mine might stop just to... The sound distorted, swallowing part of the sentence. Sorry, Alice said. Cutting in, nothing serious. Betty's voice returned in fragments. Just stopping by. Shouldn't take long. The line crackled again. If they do, they'll explain, Betty said. Clearer for a moment. But then, more than 1 hour is all Alice heard. I'm sorry, Alice began, but the connection broke into static. Tomorrow or... The words dissolved completely. Then the line went dead. Alice held the receiver a moment longer, listening to the low hum before replacing it carefully in its cradle. She considered calling back, but the thought passed. Betty had sounded distracted, probably calling from somewhere with poor reception. Whatever she meant by a friend stopping by, it didn't sound urgent. Whoever it was, if they came, they would explain. That's what Alice had heard. She returned to the kitchen and dried her hands again. Slower this time. Outside, the rain continued at the same steady pace. The house remained quiet, unchanged by the call. Alice turned on a lamp in the living room and sat down with her book. The hallway dimmed behind her. The knock came after dark. Not loud, not tentative either. Just enough pressure to be heard over the rain. Delivered once and then again. The spacing even. As if whoever stood on the other side was in no hurry. Alice had been reading for close to an hour. The lamp beside her chair cast a soft circle across the floor, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. Nothing else in the house was on. She closed the book and set it face down, listening. The rain hadn't changed. No footsteps on the gravel, no engine idling nearby. Just the knock, now finished, hanging briefly in the air before dissolving back into the sound of water against the roof. Alice stood and crossed the room. She didn't rush, but she didn't linger either. When she reached the front door, she paused long enough to look through the narrow window beside it. A man stood on the other side of the glass. He was close enough that she couldn't see his full shape at once. Dark jacket, no hat, rain beating along the shoulders and collar. He wasn't looking at the door, but slightly downward, as if reviewing something in his hands. Alice unlocked the door and opened it. Hi, she said. The man looked up. He was older than she'd expected. Late 50s, perhaps early 60s. His hair was thinning but neatly kept. His face lined in a way that suggested time rather than strain. He stood upright, composed. Not imposing, not hesitant. He held a slim folder under one arm, its edges worn from use. Evening, he said. His voice was calm, even. Sorry to bother you. That's all right, Alice replied. Can I help you? He nodded once. I'm here about the house. She waited. I was told you'd be staying here for a bit, he continued. Yes, Alice said. I'm renting. Right. He glanced past her, not intrusively, just orienting himself. Won't take long. Alice thought of the phone call. A friend stopping by. Okay, Alice said, stepping back to make room. He hesitated just long enough to register courtesy, then crossed the threshold. He wiped his shoes carefully on the mat without being asked before stepping inside. When he straightened, he looked around with familiarity rather than curiosity. Still smells the same, he said quietly. Alice closed the door. The click of the latch sounded sharper than it had earlier. He turned toward the staircase, then paused. Is it just you here? Yes. He nodded, not pleased, not relieved, just acknowledging her answer. I'll be quick, he said. He opened the folder briefly, glanced at something inside, then closed it again. I just need to check a few things, he said. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. What kinds of things? Alice asked. He met her gaze evenly. Routine. The word was delivered without emphasis. He glanced toward the stairs again. Do you mind if I start upstairs? Alice hesitated. Not refusal. Just a brief recalibration. I was told it's mostly storage up there, she said. That's right, he replied. I won't disturb anything. She considered the staircase behind him, the turn halfway up where the light from below would fade. All right, she said. Thank you. He took the stairs with steady steps, one hand resting lightly on the banister. Not cautious or rushed, simply deliberate. At the landing, he paused briefly, then continued out of sight. Alice remained where she was. A soft shift of weight overhead, a floorboard adjusting, the subtle sounds of someone moving through a space they weren't unfamiliar with. She folded her arms loosely and waited. The rain continued outside. After several minutes, the sound of movement ceased. She heard him descend before she saw him. He came down the stairs at the same measured pace. All set, he said. That was quick, Alice replied. He gave a small nod. It usually is. She waited for elaboration, but none came. Was there something specific you needed to check, she asked. He considered that for a moment. Nothing out of order. The answer came mildly. He did not move toward the door. Instead, he rested one hand lightly against the edge of the table beneath the stairs, as if allowing a moment to settle. How much longer will you need? Alice asked. He glanced at his watch, then lowered his arm. I'm done, he said. I'm just waiting for the moment to pass. Alice frowned slightly. What moment? He looked at her, though measuring the usefulness of an explanation. The one we're in. Alice held his gaze a second longer than she meant to, waiting for him to add something to it. He didn't. The sentence lingered between them. After a few seconds, he gave a small nod, more to himself than to her. That should be all. He crossed to the door and opened it. Coolly had drifted briefly into the hallway before he stepped outside. He did not look back. The door closed. Alice stood where she was, listening to his footsteps along the stone path. She waited for the sound of a car, an engine, something definitive, but nothing came. Eventually, she turned off the lamp in the living room and left the one by the phone on low. The visit had ended without urgency or conflict, and yet the space he had occupied did not feel entirely restored. The house settled again, returning to the same stillness it had before he had arrived. She told herself it had been a simple visit, a formality, someone Betty knew. After a moment, as she turned back toward the living room, the phone rang. Alice went to the table and lifted the receiver. Yes? Alice? It's Betty. Sorry to call again. The line dropped earlier. I just wanted to make sure you heard everything. Oh, all right, that's fine. There was a mix-up, Betty said. Papers shifted faintly on her end. My friend didn't make it over tonight. He was held up. He's going to stop by over the weekend instead. Alice didn't respond. Betty continued, voice steady. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes when he does come by. The receiver pressed slightly harder against Alice's ear. He didn't come, she asked. No, Betty said. Not tonight. She went on speaking, something about calling ahead next time, timing. But the words blurred, passing without settling. Alice's grip tightened on the receiver. The cord shifted faintly against the edge of the table. All right, Betty said at last. I'll let you go. Good night. Good night, Alice replied, not fully registering it. The line went quiet. She did not lower the receiver immediately. The lamp beside her cast its soft circle across the hallway floor. The lower steps of the staircase caught the light. The landing divided it. Above that, the rest of the staircase was unlit. Slowly, almost without deciding to, her eyes shifted toward it. Then her head followed. She stood there, not moving, the lamp humming behind her. That's where he had been.